Emma loved mornings. The soft hum of the coffee maker, the golden sunlight filtering through the kitchen windows, and the comforting predictability of her routine. Today, like every other, she sat at the kitchen table with her sketch pad, doodling designs for an upcoming project while sipping her favorite hazelnut coffee. Daniel's plate of toast and scrambled eggs sat across from her, untouched as usual. He was always running late. Leaving without breakfast again? Emma teased as Daniel rushed into the kitchen, buttoning his shirt. He glanced at the plate, then at her, flashing his signature grin. "Time waits for no man, and neither do my clients," he quipped, leaning down to kiss her forehead. His cologne, a blend of cedarwood and something sharp, lingered in the air as he grabbed his briefcase. "Busy day?" Emma asked, noticing his slightly disheveled tie. She reached out to fix it, her fingers grazing the fabric. Daniel chuckled. "Just the usual. Surveillance, paperwork, and dealing with people who have more secrets than sense." Emma smiled, watching him head out the door. As a private investigator, Daniel often had colorful stories about suspicious spouses or missing assets. She admired his work ethic, but sometimes wished his job didn't pull him away so often. When the door clicked shut, the house felt too quiet. Emma returned to her sketch pad, but her focus wavered. She found herself staring at the calendar pinned to the fridge. Their 5-year anniversary was only a week away, and she wanted it to be special. Perhaps a weekend getaway to the mountains? Daniel loved hiking, and it would be nice to escape the city for a while. But as she sketched out potential designs for his anniversary card, a nagging thought crept into her mind. Lately, Daniel had seemed distracted. Not overtly, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. He forgot little things like where he left his keys or what day they'd planned to visit her parents. And then there were the late nights, excused by urgent cases that kept him at the office or on the road. Emma shook her head, dismissing the thought. Marriages went through phases, didn't they? She decided she was just overthinking. Later that afternoon, Emma wandered into Daniel's home office to retrieve a pen. The room was his sanctuary, a space he kept meticulously organized. His desk was lined with neat stacks of files, his laptop centered perfectly, and the faint scent of leather from his chair filled the air. As she rummaged through the desk drawer, a piece of paper caught her attention. It was folded haphazardly, sticking out from the edge of a folder. Normally, Emma wouldn't have paid it any mind, but something about the handwriting on the visible edge stopped her. Curiosity got the better of her. She unfolded the note, her heart quickening as she read. "The truth is more dangerous than you realize. Meet me at our usual spot, Thursday, 8 p.m. Emma's stomach flipped. The words felt heavy, ominous, and entirely out of place. Who had written this? And why was it in Daniel's office? She glanced at the folder it had been tucked into. The label read Case 274, Morton. The name meant nothing to her, and flipping through the folder revealed little. Just a few blurry surveillance photos of a middle-aged man leaving an office building and sitting at a cafe. Emma tried to shake off the unease. It was probably just part of a case. Daniel's work often involved cryptic notes or clandestine meetings. But something about this particular message gnawed at her, especially the phrase, "more dangerous than you realize." She debated whether to bring it up with Daniel, but decided against it. What would she even say? He'd probably brush it off as unimportant. And yet, as she closed the drawer and left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just opened a door to something she wasn't meant to see. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. Emma had prepared his favorite meal, roast chicken with garlic mashed potatoes, but by the time he arrived, the food was cold. "Sorry, Em," he said, placing his briefcase by the door. His shirt was wrinkled, and he looked more tired than she'd seen him in weeks. It was one of those days. "It's okay," she replied, offering a smile she didn't entirely feel. "I saved you a plate." As they sat across from each other, the air felt heavier than usual. Emma wanted to ask about the note, but instead she said, "I was thinking maybe we could do something special for our anniversary. Like a weekend trip?" Daniel's fork paused midair. "A trip sounds great. Maybe the mountains?" Emma's heart lifted slightly. "That's exactly what I was thinking. Just us, no distractions." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Perfect." Later that night, As Daniel slept soundly beside her, Emma lay awake. The note was seared into her mind, its cryptic message looping over and over. She knew she shouldn't pry, but the curiosity was unbearable. What truth was dangerous enough to require a secret meeting? And why did it feel like that truth might be closer to home than she wanted to admit? The following morning, Emma couldn't shake the strange sense of unease. Over breakfast, Daniel seemed like his usual self, joking about the weather, mentioning a potential new case, and absently scrolling through his phone. But to Emma, everything felt slightly off. As he left for work, his parting kiss on her forehead lingered just a little too long, as if he could sense her inner turmoil. Emma spent the morning trying to distract herself. She worked on designs for a client's wedding gown, meticulously sketching every lace detail, but her focus kept drifting back to the note in Daniel's office. The phrase, "more dangerous than you realize," gnawed at her. Finally, unable to suppress her curiosity any longer, she made a decision. She would look deeper into Daniel's files. Not because she didn't trust him, she told herself this repeatedly, but because she needed to understand if he was hiding something serious. Once she was sure Daniel was out of the house, Emma returned to his office. The room felt different today, as if the very walls were watching her. She opened the same drawer and pulled out the folder labeled Case 274, Morton. The surveillance photos she'd seen before were there, but now she examined them more closely. Each was time-stamped, the earliest taken 2 months ago. They depicted a man, probably in his 40s, meeting various people at cafes, parks, and once in front of what appeared to be a law office. Emma's pulse quickened as she flipped through the pages. On the last page of the file was a list of dates and locations. Most were marked with check marks, but the most recent entry, Thursday, 8 p.m., Central Park, usual spot, was circled in red ink. Usual spot, she muttered. The phrase matched the note she'd found. Emma leaned back in Daniel's chair, the leather creaking beneath her. Central Park wasn't far, and if the meeting was set for tonight, she had just enough time to figure out what it was about. The day stretched endlessly. Emma tried to go about her routine, but her mind kept returning to the note. She checked the clock obsessively, counting down the hours until 8 p.m. By 7:30, she was dressed and ready to leave. She told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong, just observing. Surely, if it was just a work-related meeting, Daniel would understand her curiosity. As she neared Central Park, the evening air was cool, and the faint glow of streetlights illuminated the paths. Emma pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders and scanned the park for any sign of Daniel or the mysterious man from the photos. She found a bench near the meeting spot and waited, her heart pounding in her chest. At precisely 8 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't Daniel, but the man from the surveillance photos. He glanced around nervously before sitting on a bench across the path. Minutes later, a woman approached him. Emma squinted, trying to make out her features in the dim light. She wasn't anyone Emma recognized, but she was striking, tall, with sleek dark hair and a confident stride. Emma couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language was intense. The man leaned forward, gesturing wildly, while the woman crossed her arms, her expression cold and unreadable. At one point, the woman handed the man an envelope. He hesitated before taking it, glancing around as though he feared they were being watched. "What is this?" Emma wondered, her curiosity burning. The exchange lasted only a few minutes before the two parted ways. The man tucked the envelope into his coat and disappeared down the path, while the woman lingered for a moment, glancing at her phone before walking in the opposite direction. Emma sat frozen, her mind racing. She had expected to see Daniel, or at least someone connected to him. But this was something else entirely. Back at home, Emma replayed the scene in her mind, trying to piece together what she had witnessed. Who was the man? What was in the envelope? And why had Daniel been tracking him? Her thoughts were interrupted when Daniel walked through the door, his ties slightly loosened and his expression tired but calm. "Long day?" Emma asked, trying to keep her voice casual as he dropped his briefcase by the door. "Always," he replied, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "What about you? Did you have a productive day?" "Pretty standard," Emma said, forcing a smile. Daniel disappeared into the kitchen, and Emma felt a surge of guilt. She hated the idea of sneaking around behind his back, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, as Daniel slept soundly beside her, Emma stared at the ceiling, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her. She needed answers, but she didn't know how far she was willing to go to get them. For now, she resolved to wait. But deep down, she knew that whatever Daniel was hiding, it was only a matter of time before it came to light. Emma's resolve to wait didn't last long. The questions swirling in her mind wouldn't let her rest, and the image of the mysterious man with the envelope haunted her every waking moment. She needed answers, and waiting for them to come to her felt impossible. The next day, Emma decided to take matters into her own hands. She started by doing what she did best, observing and analyzing details. She combed through Daniel's behavior over the past few months, replaying conversations and noticing patterns she'd overlooked before. One incident stood out in particular. A month ago, Daniel had received a phone call late at night. He'd stepped out of the room to take it, his voice low and tense. At the time, Emma assumed it was work-related. His job often required discretion. But now, she wondered if it was connected to the mysterious case. Determined to find a lead, Emma decided to dig into Daniel's call history. It wasn't a habit she was proud of, but her instincts screamed that something was amiss. Waiting until Daniel left for work, she retrieved his phone from the nightstand and opened the recent call log. Her stomach churned as she scrolled through the list. Most of the calls were familiar, her number, his office, a couple of close friends. But one number stood out, unlisted and recurring. The same number had called 3 times in the past 2 weeks, the most recent being last night. Emma jotted it down and decided to trace it later. Her next step was the case file she had found earlier. While she had already seen the surveillance photos and notes, she hadn't examined the file thoroughly. Retrieving it from Daniel's desk, she flipped to the back. She found a map of the city, annotated with red circles marking key locations. One of them was Central Park, the site of the meeting she had witnessed. Another was an address Emma didn't recognize, located on the outskirts of town. The address sent a chill down her spine. What could it possibly mean? Emma searched for the location online and discovered it was an old warehouse, long abandoned according to the city records. Her curiosity intensified. Why was Daniel's case connected to such a place? Emma decided to drive to the warehouse that afternoon, hoping to uncover something tangible. But before she could leave, a knock at the door startled her. Opening it, she found a man standing on the porch, his demeanor calm but intimidating. He was tall, with sharp features and a piercing gaze. "Mrs. Harper?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. "Yes," Emma replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" "I'm Detective Mason," he said, flashing a badge. "I need to ask you a few questions about your husband." Emma's heart raced. "Daniel? What about him?" "It's about a case he's been working on," Mason explained. "I can't go into specifics, but we believe it's connected to a larger investigation we're conducting." Emma's pulse quickened. "What kind of investigation?" Mason hesitated, studying her carefully. "Let's just say it's dangerous. If Daniel has shared anything with you, it's important you let us know." Emma forced herself to remain calm. "I don't know anything about his cases. He's always been discreet about his work." Mason nodded, though his expression suggested he didn't fully believe her. "If you notice anything unusual, contact me immediately." He handed her a business card. "And Mrs. Harper, be careful." With that, he turned and left, leaving Emma standing in the doorway, her mind spinning. Later that evening, Emma couldn't resist the pull of the address she had found. Waiting until she was sure Daniel wouldn't be home for hours, she drove to the warehouse. The building was as eerie as she had imagined. Its windows were shattered and graffiti covered the walls. Emma parked her car a safe distance away and approached on foot, her nerves on edge. The heavy metal door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a cavernous interior filled with dust and debris. At first glance, the warehouse seemed abandoned, but as Emma ventured further inside, she noticed subtle signs of recent activity. Footprints in the dust, a cigarette butt on the ground, and a faint smell of motor oil. In the corner of the room, something caught her eye, a stack of papers scattered across a makeshift table. Emma sifted through them, her heart pounding as she realized they were surveillance photos. Some were of the man she had seen in Central Park, while others depicted people she didn't recognize. Then she saw it, a photo of Daniel. It was taken from a distance, showing him entering a building Emma didn't recognize. Scribbled on the back of the photo were the words, "Find leverage." Emma's blood ran cold. Why would someone be surveilling Daniel? And what did they mean by leverage? As she processed the implications, the sound of a car pulling up outside snapped her back to reality. Panicked, she gathered the photos and slipped out the side door, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. From the shadows, she watched as two men entered the warehouse. They carried themselves with purpose, their voices low but urgent. Emma didn't dare stay to eavesdrop. She hurried back to her car and drove away, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. When Emma returned home, she found Daniel already there, casually flipping through a magazine on the couch. His calm demeanor only heightened her unease. "How was your day?" he asked, smiling up at her. "Uneventful." Emma lied, forcing a smile. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers about the photo and the surveillance. But something stopped her, a voice in the back of her mind warning her to wait, to gather more information before making her move. That night, as Daniel slept beside her, Emma lay wide awake, clutching the photo of him she had taken from the warehouse. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than she had imagined, and she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Emma couldn't shake the tension of her discovery at the warehouse. The photo of Daniel and the cryptic "find leverage" note weighed heavily on her mind. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but the more she uncovered, the more determined she became. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Emma maintained her composure around Daniel, her smiles and casual conversations masking the turmoil within. She resumed her usual routines, but her mind worked overtime, piecing together fragments of information. Emma decided to delve deeper into Daniel's digital life. She felt a pang of guilt as she searched through his laptop while he was out, but she justified it as necessary. Navigating his files, she found the expected: work documents, emails, and presentations. But buried in an unmarked folder, she discovered something chilling: a series of encrypted files. She clicked on one, but it required a password. Her frustration mounted as she tried various guesses, none of them successful. But then she noticed a text document in the same folder titled "Access Codes." Opening it revealed a list of random strings of numbers and letters, one of which matched the file she had clicked. The document contained pages of information: names, dates, locations. It looked like a surveillance report, and Emma's stomach sank as she realized it was tied to Daniel's case. One name kept appearing: Victor Lasky. She searched the name online, finding sparse but troubling results. Victor was a suspected arms dealer, rumored to have connections to underground networks spanning multiple states. Why would Daniel, a consultant for private clients, be involved with someone like this? Emma's newfound knowledge didn't sit quietly in her mind. It consumed her thoughts. She started noticing inconsistencies in Daniel's explanations for his late nights and frequent trips. Each new excuse sounded more implausible, her trust in him eroding by the day. But Emma wasn't just worried about betrayal. She was terrified. If Daniel was truly involved with someone as dangerous as Victor Lasky, what did that mean for their safety? Her paranoia grew. Every creak of the house, every unfamiliar car parked on their street sent her heart racing. One night, she thought she saw someone watching the house from across the street, but when she checked again, the figure was gone. Daniel remained oblivious, his behavior unchanged. But Emma began to notice small details that hinted at his own inner turmoil. The way his jaw tightened when his phone rang, the tired look in his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching Point one evening. Emma followed Daniel. She knew it was risky, but she couldn't sit idly by any longer. Staying a safe distance behind his car, she trailed him across town to a nondescript motel on the edge of the city. From her vantage point in a nearby lot, Emma watched as Daniel entered one of the rooms. Minutes later, a man joined him. It was the same man she had seen in the surveillance photos, the one from Central Park. Emma's hands clenched the steering wheel as she debated what to do. She couldn't confront him now. It was too dangerous. But the encounter confirmed her fears. Daniel wasn't just caught up in something illicit. He was actively working with dangerous people. She drove home in a daze, her mind racing. Whatever was happening, it was spiraling out of control, and she needed to act before it was too late. Emma knew she couldn't face this alone. She considered reaching out to the detective who had visited her before, but something held her back. What if Daniel had connections that extended beyond her understanding? If she went to the authorities, would it put her in more danger? Instead, she decided to set her own trap. Using the information she had gathered, Emma created a fake email account and sent a message to Victor Lasky's known address, pretending to be someone from Daniel's team. She claimed to have valuable information about their operations and requested a meeting. It was a bold move, one that made her palms sweat as she typed out the words. But she needed to understand the full scope of what Daniel had gotten himself into. The response came within hours, a single line with coordinates and a time. The meeting was set for the following night at an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town. Emma arrived early, her heart pounding as she parked her car and waited. The lot was dimly lit, with only a few flickering street lights casting eerie shadows. She stayed hidden, watching as a black SUV pulled in and parked. Two men stepped out, their silhouettes imposing in the dim light. One of them, she assumed, was Victor. Emma's breath hitched as another car approached. It was Daniel. She ducked lower in her seat, her eyes wide with disbelief. He was meeting with them, confirming everything she had feared. The men exchanged words she couldn't hear, their body language tense but familiar. Then, one of the men handed Daniel a briefcase. Emma's chest tightened as she realized this was no ordinary exchange. It was a transaction, and Daniel was deeply involved. As the men dispersed, Emma snapped photos with her phone. She had the evidence she needed. But as she watched Daniel drive away, a heavy sadness settled over her. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about realizing that the man she thought she knew was a stranger. Emma waited for Daniel to return home, her heart pounding as she prepared herself for the inevitable confrontation. She sat at the kitchen table, the photos spread out in front of her like damning evidence in a courtroom. When Daniel walked through the door, his face paled as he saw her expression. "What's this?" he asked, his voice unsteady as he looked at the photos. "It's what you've been hiding from me," Emma said, her voice cold. "You're working with criminals, Daniel. You've lied to me, put us both in danger, and I deserve to know why." Daniel sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, it's not what you think." "Then explain it," she challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've chosen a life I can't be a part of." Daniel hesitated, his eyes filled with regret. "I didn't have a choice. They forced me into this. If I didn't cooperate, they threatened to hurt you." Emma's resolve wavered at his words, but the weight of his betrayal was too much to bear. "You should have told me. We could have faced it together." Daniel's head bowed, his silence speaking volumes. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Emma went to the authorities, armed with the evidence she had collected. The case unraveled, and Daniel's involvement became public knowledge. Emma moved out, unable to reconcile the man she had loved with the choices he had made. The trust between them was shattered, and though she wanted to believe his intentions had been good, the damage was done. Years later, Emma looked back on the experience with a mix of sadness and gratitude. It had been the hardest chapter of her life, but it had also taught her the importance of listening to her instincts and fighting for the truth. Sometimes, love isn't enough to overcome betrayal, and sometimes the hardest decision is the one that sets you free.